A lot. The president said that the stimulus would save the nation from a depression and create about 1.5 million jobs. Too bad it just didn't work, right? Well, according to figures, it actually did. The New York Times took an in-depth look at the stimulus plan, and they concluded that the program did indeed work. IHS Global Insight, macroeconomic advisors, and Moody'sEconomy.com all crunched the number. And they've all estimated that the bill has added between 1.6 million to 1.8 million jobs so far, and that its ultimate impact will be roughly 2.5 million jobs. So while the unemployment rate is still at 9.7%, it did ultimately save us from another Great Depression. So why do Americans believe that the stimulus bill was such a huge failure? Well, maybe it's because the White House did such a shoddy PR job. Here to discuss it with me, I have media consultant Joel Silverman. Joel, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So this latest poll coming out by the New York Times and CBS says that only 6% of Americans think that the stimulus actually worked. And yet the figures show that the stimulus did indeed work. So where did the breakdown happen? Where did it all go wrong?
Media narrative. It's all about keeping the media narrative, losing the media narrative. Let's look at how the media narrative played in this particular situation, but let's look at the media narrative for 40 years. And let's look back to something I like to call the big lie.
Which one?
Well, the big lie, I'm talking about the big lie that started the whole big lie theory that was in Mein Kampf. The idea that you tell something so outrageous that nobody will ever go against it. And you repeat it over and over again and people begin to believe it. That's where Fox News comes in. So now we have big lies about the stimulus package, and then we have senators, of course, who voted against it, who immediately go out and be seen in the most hypocritical of acts saying, look what I did for you while I voted against it. What? Okay, so why does this happen? Your question is a good one. It's losing the media narrative. And how do people lose the media narrative? By great salesmanship. They were beaten. Do you remember a musical years ago called The Music Man that was made into a movie where a salesman named Harold Hill walked into a little peaceful town in Iowa, River City, and he said, friends, either you're closing your eyes to a situation you do not wish to acknowledge, or you're not aware of the caliber of disaster indicated by the presence of a pool hall in your community. Well, you got trouble, my friends. Those are the conservatives. For 40 years, they put together organizations to say, well, you got trouble. Government is bad. Government is bad. Government is bad. Government is bad. Well, everybody starts to believe that. And in a tough time, it's hard to believe government is good. And what do wonky Democrats do? Instead of speaking their values, we're doing the right thing, they speak, no, there's no trouble. No, there's no trouble. No, well, right away they're saying no. They're defending. Or big lies like there's a left-wing bias to the media. You know that one. You've heard that one before.
I just don't get it, though, because especially if we look at Barack Obama, somebody who, during the campaign trail, really wowed audiences, really showed that he was a master here of the whole PR, of selling himself, of selling his promises. How did he let this one fail so bad? You can't say that just Fox News or just Republicans have so much power. If the figures are there, this is a man that used to know how to sell it. What happened?
Well, I think there's a whole difference in selling a campaign and going against 8 years than selling what's going on in the worst economic slowdown since the Great Depression. I think he's had a really tough selling job. Now, I'm not going to tell you he's done a brilliant job of message control. Absolutely not. They lost the message on health care, they lost the message on the stimulus plan, and they've almost lost the base completely. Basically because they don't value dissent the way they should, because they fear it. All presidents do. They're no different. This is a first-term administration fearing dissent and trying to control. How do they control it? They limit access. You don't behave well, you don't get your gold access badge. Well, that controls the message a bit, but what it fails to do is it lets people say Barack Obama is a socialist. When, if other people were in the crowd like me, I'd say, no, he's a centrist, I'm a socialist. Because that way, the president gets some room to his left. We haven't let that happen. The right has been very smart. They conflated institutions of the right that are not the Republican Party, but that are the Heritage Foundation, the American Enterprise Institute, conflated them with the church and focus on the family. Together, they exert pressure from the right and pull. What does the left do? They fund a focus group. Don't get me started.
But still, I mean, if we're still going to talk about a liberal bias in the media, like you like to bring up, like you brought up before, a lot of people will say that the New York Times itself is also a liberal news outlet, and yet the New York Times, the people that write for them, the economists, also were all over Obama, all over talking about how this stimulus is failing, and then 1 year later, all of a sudden today, they decide to hail it and say that it actually worked.
Well,
Why did they decide a year later?
You have to talk about how that big lie works in some place like the New York Times. If the New York Times, one of the great bastions left of journalism, and you know how passionate I am about journalism, if it's being told that there is a liberal bias, then they're going to fight as hard as they can to show that they don't. What do they do to fight as hard as they can? Show every other point of view. Well, I guess the people that propose that big lie, because it's not true, won, because they got the New York Times to move. That's what the big lie did. And Fox News is an amplifier. They're not the start. Let's be clear, they're not the start. They're an amplifier. They're an amplifier of a point of view.
Very quick, my last question too. Could we also assume that part of a lie is, because he was such a fabulous campaigner, that people had much too high of expectations for Barack Obama? So instead of really listening to what this stimulus plan was supposed to do, which is save us from a Great Depression, people thought that it would just automatically, put the economy back into a booming phase.
Well, did you see the New Yorker cover where he was walking on water and then all of a sudden fell in?
Indeed.
That's an example of what we had. Those were our expectations. You're absolutely right. Of course the expectations were so high. And a whole lot of people got involved in politics and believed, again, dared to believe, people that hadn't believed for a long time. And then reality came in. Government is hard. Doing this is hard. 1 year is a short period of time to move legislation. It doesn't give them excuses. It doesn't mean they did the best job they could. But yes, expectations were unrealistically high, short of walking on water, curing the sick, doing hello country, you're healed. It's not going to happen.
All right, thank you, Joel, for being here. Indeed, 1 year since the stimulus has been passed, it looks like it actually did work and it did create the jobs that it promised, and yet, thanks to perhaps the media, thanks to the White House just failing at putting the figures out there and telling it how it is, people in America don't think it worked. They think it failed. All right, we can take another break, but don't